Hello everyone, my name is Pixlriffs and welcome back to the Minecraft Survival Guide. I hope you guys are having a good day. Welcome back to the Java Edition Survival Guide world. We are back here once again, and today we're going to take a look at a couple of farms that I've been working on off camera for gathering up some nether foliage. I'm talking about the crimson and warped fungi, the roots, and also the sprouts. Now, this is kind of an interesting concept for a farm here because we have a few things to talk about here. We've got crimson roots, crimson fungus, warped roots, and warped fungus, all of which can be grown by bone mealing some Nylium, and all of which will drop without the use of any tools. What you will not see in that chest is the nether sprouts, which I believe I planted a couple of up here. Yes, you can see them right here. These little short, bluish green blades of grass, which I think actually look fantastic as kind of frozen grass here in a mountain biome. But those you need to harvest using shears. So I don't have a huge amount of them yet, but because that has required going through and meticulously shearing some parts of the nether foliage in the nether when it's grown naturally on Nylium, or alternatively bone mealing it to get these things to appear. But they are not like an evolution of the warped roots or anything. They are basically just a separate grass entity that grows there and can only be harvested with shears. In fact, even a silk touch tool like my silk touch axe here or my silk touch pickaxe is not enough to harvest those. We will need shears to do that, and I have just destroyed both of those, but don't worry, we'll get them back later in this episode. So what I plan to do today is put together a couple of farms which we can use to generate large amounts of the crimson roots, crimson fungus, and warped roots, and also a separate farm which is going to get us a fair amount of those nether sprouts, because I think we should be harvesting everything we possibly can. In the process, we might actually get a few twisting vines, because those grow up naturally from the warped Nylium. What we won't see is any weeping vines, because those actually generate as part of crimson fungus when it's grown into a giant tree. So there's actually a little bit of nuance to some of these farms, and we'll be tackling all of the crimson and warped stem farming in a separate episode. We'll also potentially be farming some shroomlights using the same methods. But today I want to focus on crimson and warped Nylium and what we can get out of those, because that will give us a large amount of the crimson and warped fungus, which we can then use for a tree farm episode, for a nether tree farm episode a little bit further down the line. So I think today we're just going to stick with farming stuff from Nylium, and you'll be surprised, there are actually some really interesting properties of Nylium and the roots and stuff that spread from it that you might not have predicted. One of the first things I'm going to do, because we will need pistons for this episode, is craft a few up, and you can do this with warped wood and crimson wood as well, but for whatever reason, blackstone does not take the place of cobblestone in these recipes, and I think in previous episodes I have said that blackstone can be used in any instance that cobblestone can. It turns out that for redstone devices, that's not actually true, and I've tried making dispensers or droppers with blackstone, and it's not possible. I think the reason for that is actually that you cannot get redstone dust anywhere in the nether, so the nether material isn't necessarily compatible with that. But the same is true of the warped wood, yet the warped wood and crimson wood can be used in place of wood in these recipes. So it's a little bit hit and miss. It's a little bit peculiar. You can use blackstone to make a furnace, you can't use it to make a dropper or a dispenser, which I think is a bit of a shame and maybe something that could change in future. But for now, we can use these pistons to set up a farm. We've got a bunch of dispensers in here, and thanks to the fact that I now have a pretty effective mob farm out there in the ocean, I have an absolute ton of bone meal. So we're actually going to be taking 3 stacks of bone blocks, each of which will break down into 9 stacks of bone meal, and we're going to be using that to charge up our farm, because we're going to be generating a lot of stuff today. And with my redstone box and my red concrete box in hand, we're going to head back over to the area by the beehive, where I tend to do all of my redstone testing these days, and I'm going to show you exactly what it takes to generate some warped and crimson foliage. Here we are with the mob farm hovering in the sky in the background. Looks kind of crazy up there in the sky, doesn't it? And now, over here, we're going to go through a little bit of what it takes to generate all of this stuff, because you're probably used to seeing a lot of this in the nether, but the exact circumstances in which it generates are kind of specific and quite interesting to cover. Let's break all of these blocks down into bone meal. I'm going to put these in a chest for the moment, so we have plenty of access to bone meal a little bit later on, and we're going to keep 1 stack of this so that I can show you exactly how all of this warped stuff gets created when we bone meal this patch of warped Nylium here. I'm going to start in the center, and if we bone meal it once, you'll see a decent amount of this stuff gets generated around the outside. It's not following any specific kind of pattern, and everything that grows here will grow in a different position, so it's not like flowers in a flower forest where it's affixed to a specific position that they will grow. Instead, we can grow this multiple times and slowly but surely fill up the square here, and you'll see that there are a variety of things growing here: warped roots, warped fungi, and nether sprouts. And eventually, if we bone meal the center a few more times, this entire 5x5 square fills up. Now watch what happens if I add a little bit of Nylium to the sides here. We'll take all of these roots and stuff out, and then I will show you exactly how this works. If we bone meal the same block there, you'll notice that it does not stretch any further than a 5x5. So basically 2 blocks away from this center block here is the furthest it will go. So we don't need any blocks outside of this 5x5 section if all we're doing is bone mealing a section in the very center. And one of the things I think you guys will find most interesting about this whole setup is that we don't actually need the entire square to be composed of Nylium at all. We can actually place a 5x5 of grass centered on a single block of warped Nylium, like so, and then when I bone meal this block of Nylium in the center, it's actually going to produce the warped and crimson foliage anyway. Yeah, now you'll notice that you also get a couple of crimson and warped roots popping up as part of the naturally generated stuff from this single block of warped Nylium, and the same is true of crimson Nylium as well. It will occasionally generate the warped foliage in the process of this. That includes roots as well as fungi, but fungi seem to be a little bit more common when you're generating it using a different block of Nylium. But the fact remains that if you want to generate all of the possible nether foliage, you don't even need crimson Nylium at all. All you should need is warped Nylium, because crimson Nylium will not get you the shorter nether sprouts as far as I'm aware. It will occasionally generate warped roots and warped fungi, but it does not generate nether sprouts, whereas warped Nylium will generate all 5 of the potential types of flora that you get from bone mealing Nylium. It will get you occasionally crimson roots, occasionally crimson fungus, and all 3 of these blue types. Now naturally, while you can bone meal the Nylium and keep harvesting it all manually yourself, it does get a little bit tedious doing this. You'll notice that I've managed to get a couple of stacks of the roots. We've got 16 warped fungus, and all we need to do is just bone meal this square and keep harvesting the results. I haven't got any of the sprouts because I'm not using shears to cut those down, but that's fine. We'll get a few of those later on. We're going to look at making a more automated shearing station for this stuff as well. But in the meantime, this is feeling a little bit slow to me, and I think we can probably punch it up a little bit using some redstone. So here in this first part of the video, I'm going to use redstone to build up what is basically a flower farm that you can also use in a flower forest as well, but it's possible to generate a lot of crimson and warped foliage this way. And we're going to grab a little bit of the red concrete. We're going to be grabbing a few redstone components here. We'll need some pistons, a couple of observers to make a clock. We'll need a handful of repeaters. You'll probably need around like 12, 13 of those probably. And a couple of things like levers. We'll need a sticky piston so we can turn the observer clock on and off. A bit of redstone dust, and I think that should have us covered, apart from also 1 dispenser and maybe some hoppers and a couple of chests to feed bone meal into the dispenser when we need it. So the principle we're going to be using here is actually pretty simple. If I bone meal this piece of warped Nylium, it grows some warped roots. When we activate this piston, it breaks the roots, and they actually drop as an item. Unlike grass, which will occasionally drop seeds but does not drop the grass item unless it is sheared, you can actually get the warped or crimson foliage from these blocks, with the exception of nether sprouts, when they are moved around with a piston, which means we can build up a flower farm design that will actually work super well for gathering up all of this. So we're going to build up the redstone part of this farm first. Basically building it from the bottom up seems like the most sensible thing to do. At this point, we're going to build up 1, and then we're going to place a dispenser facing upwards. Now, dispensers will actually generate warped foliage using bone meal in the same way that a dispenser on grass will generate some grass and flowers around it if you activate it using bone meal. Now, one of the cool things about warped and crimson Nylium that is also true of grass is that if you dispense bone meal onto the block from below, it will still grow some foliage. So what we can do is have a platform with a dispenser concealed below it, and that will actually grow warped and crimson foliage on the Nylium above. This is going to be activated by an observer clock, which is a very simple mechanism with 2 observers facing into each other. We're going to have one facing this way, and we're going to have another one facing that way, like so. We'll take that block away, and now whenever I end up activating this lever, it will start a clock running between these 2 observers, which is going to tick the dispenser at quite a high speed. Obviously, it can't do anything right now because there isn't anything above it for it to bone meal, and that does not waste any of the bone meal in the dispenser, making it a very useful mechanism. These repeaters are going to detect whenever this redstone clock is pulsing the dispenser, and it's also going to send the redstone signal off in two directions to two sets of pistons. These pistons are going to be activating thanks to a bit of redstone wiring down here, and they're going to be shuttling back and forth a large pad of grass and Nylium on top of here. And it's actually going to be a 6x5 platform of grass and Nylium. Now, the reason the platform's going to be 6x5 is because we're going to have warped and crimson Nylium up here, and the platform is going to generate a 5x5 of crimson or warped foliage around the outside of it. And now on each side of this, I built up a little platform where we're going to be placing the redstone wiring. We're going to have a piece of redstone wire on each of these blocks here, basically adjacent to this repeater, and then facing into each of these blocks, we're going to have a repeater which is going to transfer the power to that block and fire a piston placed on top of it. Now, the reason to set up this the way we have, and the reason that we aren't using 2-tick delay on these repeaters so that we can save a repeater here, is because when this pulses, the redstone clock actually goes fast enough that it would not turn off this repeater if it had a 2-tick delay. So we're actually installing a little bit of segmented delay is what I've been thinking of it as. And what this means is that this repeater adds a little bit of delay. It goes through the redstone wire here, and then the next set of repeaters adds a little bit of delay, by which time this repeater has already turned off, and then it can kind of shuttle the signal back and forth while it is firing these pistons. And the pistons up here are just going to go across the top of these red concrete blocks like so, and then we can start to build the platform. We're going to have one piece of Nylium here, the other piece of Nylium there, and we're going to build a 5x5 platform around each of these, basically, so that we end up with it stopping here. So right here we have a 5x5 around the warp Nylium, a 5x5 around the crimson Nylium, and there is one space left over at the end here. And then we can start filling this dispenser up with bone meal because it is time to activate the farm. At this point, we might want to go around the back here, place a couple of hoppers facing in towards this dispenser, and put a chest on top of there that all of the extra bone meal can go into. And obviously, the storage system for this bone meal could go as high as you want, depending on how much bone meal you actually have. Now, when we hop up onto here and take a look at what's happening at the farm from above, if we pull this lever, then the farm activates, and as you can see, it generates a whole lot of warped and crimson foliage in a very short amount of time. Now, naturally, this all has to be collected manually, but you do have a pretty generous amount of time in which to do that. You can run the farm for up to 5 minutes before you have to start collecting stuff, otherwise the item entities will despawn. And you'll notice that a few of them do end up coming in down here by the mechanism, so we might need to figure out a better way of collecting that stuff up. There isn't really room underneath here for any kind of collection mechanism. But thankfully, the blocks are moving around on top of here fast enough that you don't end up with any of the roots or the fungus coming into the item hoppers here. And looking at my inventory right now, it is really starting to fill up with this foliage. So let me dump a bunch of this stuff off into here. I'll clear my inventory out in its entirety, and we'll see exactly how much stuff we end up getting. Okay, I went and slept, I emptied out my inventory, and let's get this thing running. So I'm going to sit here for a little while watching all of this stuff generate, and hopefully in a short little while we should have enough stuff to completely fill up my inventory. Okay, that was even more than I expected. I ran the farm for less than a minute and already my inventory is completely full of all of these warped and crimson roots. You will notice though that I don't have a huge amount of the warped and crimson fungus compared to the amount of crimson and warped roots I have. Obviously nether sprouts are completely absent because they have to be harvested manually by the player, but from this we got maybe, I'd say, like 1/6 of the amount of stuff we have here is the fungus, and the rest is all the roots, and we will want some way of getting rid of the roots in a useful way. Thankfully, the roots can actually be composted, so all we need to do is set up an auto composter nearby with a bunch of hoppers filtering into some composters, and we'll actually get some bone meal that can be recycled back into the farm. It's not going to be completely self-sustaining, but it should at least be enough to allow us to create some extra bone meal to provide a surplus to what's here in this chest. So there we go, simple composter setup over here. Just whatever goes in this chest, we'll put the crimson in one side, we'll put the warped in another. It seems like it tends to compost pretty well, actually, so that should all start producing bone meal, which will go into this chest, and eventually that will start filling into these hoppers. I think a couple of the roots ended up in there just from me moving a couple of items around and setting the chests up. So with that now feeding into the farm, all we really need to do is activate the farm, stand up here, collect all the warped fungus, and continue putting the roots back into here, and it will cycle through all of that bone meal until we have a heck of a lot of warped fungus. And after running the farm for a little while, I discovered that eventually it reaches a threshold where the dispenser has dispensed all of the bone meal inside of it faster than the hoppers can supply it, which meant it was skipping every other dispenser pulse, and it was only giving me warped foliage because that was where the platform was when the platform went over the dispenser each time, and it was only able to keep up by only producing warped foliage. But in the end, I managed to get myself basically like 11 or 12 stacks of each type of fungus. There's probably, 9 stacks of crimson fungus there and more like, 12 or 13 or so of the warped fungus, which means we have more than enough to start tree farming and actually gathering this stuff in bulk, which means shroom lights as well as the stem blocks and the warp blocks. The warp blocks can also be composted as well, so this whole thing is also kind of a bone meal factory in itself. Naturally, it needs a lot of bone meal to sustain a farm like this, but as you can hear, the composters are still working away from a fresh double chest of these supplies. They do compost very well, and you end up with a surplus of bone meal pretty quickly. Or if not a surplus, then a pretty decent supply. But while we're over here experimenting with this stuff, I thought we would have a go at designing a farm that allows us to manually harvest stuff like grass and stuff like the nether sprouts, because it's kind of interesting to get hold of some of that stuff for detail work, and it cannot be obtained using a more automatic farm like this one. Instead, we are going to automate it after a fashion, but we're going to use a few rails to do this and have a player moving back and forth in a minecart to shear stuff as it grows. Now, by comparison to this farming setup, the redstone here is going to be incredibly simple. We're just going to have a track here that the minecart is going to run along. We could have this at ground level if we want to, but I'm going to raise it up here for the purposes of using the red concrete, and we're going to maybe make it around, let's say, this long. It doesn't even need to be that long necessarily, but we can always make it a longer farm so that we have more opportunity for the stuff to grow as we roll along it. And what we're going to do is set up powered rails at either end here that can be activated by levers on top. So we can start the farm from basically either end and just sit in a minecart, switch it on, roll across the platform, and then roll back with the automatic powered rail at the end. We're going to put a detector rail next to each of those, and probably one roughly in the center, so I'd say about there. We'll have 2 more sets of powered rail in between those, activated using levers there, so that the minecart continues to roll over. And we're going to have each of these detector rails output via redstone wire here. So if I place a minecart on top of this one, you'll see it simply activates right there and then. We're going to put dispensers basically right next to each of those, which should fire the dispensers every time the redstone dust there activates. So if I turn this powered rail at the end off, sit in this minecart, and there we go, you'll see that each of the dispensers activates as we go, meaning that we can look at a field of Nylium on the top here and basically have it constantly regrow everything with bone meal on the surface. I'm going to head back up to the mob farm for a second to grab a few more bones out of the chest, which should be one of these. Yep, there we go. Plenty of those in there, and probably a bunch more in the space next door. Yep, got a lot of those. I've been AFK for more gunpowder so I can make some more TNT and go netherite mining. And now we've got all of this bone meal, we can just throw this into each of the dispensers, and of course you could automate this once again using hoppers in much the same way that we have over here. And on top of that, we're going to grow basically a 3x9 platform of Nylium, and the dispenser's bone meal will still reach 2 blocks in every direction, meaning that it will actually grow a lot of the foliage on here, but that is basically because the reach of a set of shears, if we're sat in a minecart, will only really reach 3 blocks at the height of the foliage we want to trim from this, which is going to be those nether sprouts. So if I sit here, for example, if I'm aiming in this direction like so, and we fire this, you'll notice that the nether sprouts generate at a certain height, and if I'm holding down left click like so, I can just about manage to reach nether sprouts on all 3 blocks. In fact, I'm actually missing the left hand and right hand ends, so maybe we need to extend the track out 1 more block in each direction with some powered rail to make sure we catch those at either side. But you'll notice that at the height I am right now, I won't be able to trim nether sprouts if they are any further away from me. I'm just about catching the stuff at that back block, but I wouldn't be able to look up any further because then I would end up missing some of the nether sprouts at the top here. And that went through a set of shears very fast. I was not even really paying attention to that, but that was actually pretty good. So let's gather up all of the nether sprouts that we got from that. Let's see exactly how many we got. Looks like we got a stack and 19. So that is not too bad. And in the process of that, of course, we got ourselves some more warped roots and some more warped fungus, a couple of crimson roots and crimson fungus as well. Once again, remember this is only growing on warped Nylium, but we are still getting the crimson foliage as a result. And oh, it occurs to me that we can't actually disable that now because of the detector rail. Well, we may as well just take the detector rail out. And yeah, it looks like we will need to extend this track one more block on each side. Now here is another interesting approach we could take to this if we wanted it to be a slightly longer AFK period, because as you saw, that set of shears that we just had got depleted pretty quickly. But we have a secret trick up our sleeves here, thanks to the fact that unbreaking and mending can be put on a set of shears. Now, do I have any emeralds stashed around here somewhere? If not, I probably have some stuff that I can trade with my villagers in here. Oh, what's this skeleton doing in here? That's a problem. Probably should light this area up a little bit better. But all of the villagers in here should still be safe. Even if a zombie spawned in here, they are closed in enough that they wouldn't be able to be gotten to. Now, let's trade for some emeralds with these villagers. There we go. There's a little trick I've picked up, actually. If you end up using the space bar after you've traded once, you'll end up refreshing that trade in the interface. It's a super quick way of farming emeralds. Just keep tapping the spacebar and you should be able to get through the trades pretty quickly, like so. And now we can repurpose these emeralds to trade for, whenever we have one of the master villagers like this guy, some bottles of enchanting, which we can get 12 of before the trade locks up again, and we can always trade with the next guy along, get ourselves a bunch of these, and then we can use these to our advantage in mending the set of shears. Because all we should need to do is place a dispenser behind each of these detector rails, like so. We could probably even take out these blocks from underneath there, just in case the levers activating those powered rails were activating the dispenser in some way, and then we end up filling each of these dispensers, when we have a big enough supply, with bottles of enchanting. I've only got 20 of each of those so far, but then making sure that all of my other tools and armor are full up on durability, we can start this whole process again. And then holding the shears as the only tool I have in my hand, I should be able to shear this basically infinitely, because every time I go over one of these detector rails, I should be gaining a little bit of experience, which will go straight towards mending the shears. As you can see, my shears are mending in durability every time I roll over one of those pressure plates. And you don't even need to use that every time. You'll see a little bit of the experience is creeping into my hotbar, but that will basically allow me to run this farm indefinitely until I run out of bottles of enchanting, at least. And with a decent supply of those traded from clerics, I can pretty much guarantee I'd be able to farm this stuff all day long. I did just run out of bottles of enchanting though, and it seems like maybe we need to add a little bit more delay to this, maybe an additional rail on the end after all, because yeah, the detector rails are just providing slightly too long of a redstone signal to these sections either side over here. But then all I need to do is hop out of the minecart. It really doesn't make a huge amount of difference, and this farm works splendidly well. Look at the amount of nether sprouts we've been able to gather, and there's a few that have fallen off the back of the platform here. If you wanted to automate collection, of course, you could always do that just by having another set of dispensers along the back here with water streams that could flush the farm out, as long as there was something like a glass pane or something along the front here to prevent it from washing the rails away. You would have a pretty good time with this thing. And in the short time I was at the farm just then, I've been able to get myself basically 3 extra stacks of nether sprouts. We got ourselves a decent amount to begin with, but now we have basically 4 stacks total from all of the farming we've done today. Plus we got a couple more crimson roots, a bunch more crimson fungus, and some warped roots that I'm just going to add into the composter over here to generate a little bit more compost for this farm. But I think both of these farms are actually decent enough that I'm probably going to install them in the nether research laboratory that I've got underneath the grounds of the castle, just so they're a bit more permanent and so they're not out here right next to the beehive feeling like they are sort of out in the middle of nowhere, basically. Because I think we'll be using a lot of these if we want to gather a bit more warped and crimson fungus. I think those are going to be really fun to build with once we start turning them into giant fungus and harvesting those stems. I think there is a lot of potential there. But I hope you guys enjoyed this look at farming some nether foliage over here in the overworld. You can, of course, build these in the nether as well, as long as you have access to redstone. So enjoy that and harvest yourself some goodies. My name has been Pixlriffs. Thank you so much for watching the Minecraft Survival Guide. Don't forget to leave a like on it if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you want to see more. And I'll see you guys soon. Take care. Bye for now.